One day in October 2011, Barack Obama made Angela Merkel cry. The incident happened during a G20 meeting and was caused by the US president's insistence that the European Central Bank purchase Greek Treasury bonds. To understand why the prospect of quantitative easing could bring a famously impassive politician to tears, we need the tools of what Daniela Gabor calls critical macro finance. Rooted in the analytic framework devised by the post-Keynesian economist Hyman Minsky, macrofinance studies the changing relations between capital and the state. It focuses on the nexus formed by departments of the Treasury, central banks, international organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank, and private financial institutions. What makes Daniela Gabor's approach to macrofinance critical? The answer is that she historicizes the roles assumed by the various actors under examination and shows how the transformation of their interactions results from political struggles, those involving asset holders and public agencies, but also labor unions and social movements. The ensuing periodization amounts to a succession of macro-financial regimes, each of which is predicated on a certain consensus about what governments, central bankers, and private investors can and cannot do. Throughout the 3 decades following the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, the consensus among Western countries was that fiscal and monetary policies should be aligned. This for the sake of helping the state guarantee full employment and invest directly in its citizens' welfare. By the late 1970s, however, things had changed. Inflationary pressure due to social demands in the global north and challenges to the system of unequal exchange stemming from the global south prompted a transition toward what became known as the Washington Consensus. According to Milton Friedman, whose pronouncements constituted the new common sense, monetary policy needed to be divorced from fiscal policy, even at the cost of subjecting economies to recessive shocks. To manifest their newfound independence, central bankers were to make price stability their sole preoccupation and ensure that elected officials echoed Margaret Thatcher's pledge to renounce reckless money creation. Good statecraft now consisted of privatizing public goods and liberalizing labor markets. Enabling private investors to allocate resources as they saw fit was how governments were expected to improve the lives of its constituents. By the turn of the 21st century, however, and increasingly in the wake of the 2008 crash, neoliberal market solutions ceased to be consensual. At the same time, financial institutions remained too big not only to fail, but also to allow the return of the Bretton Woods regime of big government and capital control. Hence the advent of what Gabor calls the Wall Street Consensus. Under this new regime, states were once again empowered to set ambitious goals regarding infrastructural development and energy transition, yet what they could not afford was to take the measures that would allow them to finance such projects from their own purse. Instead, public officials involved in the new consensus negotiated investability pacts, whereby private investors would be incentivized to pay for the fulfillment of their ambitions. The mission of the emerging de-risking state, Gabor explains, was no longer to let financial capital do its thing, as the Washington Consensus prescribed, but to coax it into doing the right thing. Rather than provide across-the-board tax cuts, governments would now offer tax credits and looser regulations, but only to investors professing to care about making the world a greener and more evenly prosperous place. The current age of the de-risking state raises at least 2 sets of questions. The first one, which is at the center of Gabor's work, pertains to the difference between the Washington and the Wall Street consensuses. Does the newer regime deviate, at least in part, from the neoliberal premises of the older one? Or must we understand that initiatives such as the World Bank's 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, and the European Green Deal simply amount to greenwashing and stealth privatization of public assets. For the left, taking a position on this issue is highly consequential. To engage with de-risking, however critically, implies that private finance could be mobilized for the public good, if only states and international organizations decided to add sticks to carrots, for instance, by penalizing brown investments as much as they incentivize green ones. To denounce the very logic of the Wall Street consensus, on the other hand, conveys that nothing short of a big green state can save us from the neoliberal strictures of the last two macro-financial regimes. The first path assumes that capital can be disciplined, the second that central planning can be democratic. Two big ifs. Finally, the second set of questions regards the sustainability of the Wall Street consensus under Trump 2.0. Can we still speak of a de-risking state when tax credits give way to an odd mix of tax cuts and tariffs? And what will be left of the neoliberal rationale if the orange man in the White House succeeds in bending the Federal Reserve to his will? While Gabor believes that the de-risking regime is undergoing a mutation rather than meeting its demise, she also notes that macro-financial consensuses are usually about to crumble when the leaders of dominant powers start to complain about ungrateful allies. This was the case of Richard Nixon when he decided to close the gold window, but also of the Soviet leadership just before the perestroika. Could the return of the whining hegemon signal the impending collapse of the Wall Street consensus? Our interview took place in Paris on April 11, 2025.